And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. In the mid-1950s, Prince Rupert was a city without a hockey rink, and the biggest dream a young boy could have was to play high school basketball for the Rainmakers. And what a team the Rainmakers were. They traveled to Alaska for games, but gained their toughness by playing the town's senior men's basketball league. On today's Open Connection, MLA Ross remembers playing the Rainmakers.
When in my younger years as a young adult, I actually played basketball in Rupert at what's known as the All-Native Basketball Tournament. And I also played for the high school team, the Rebels. We got our butts kicked all the time by the Rainmakers. Any Rainmakers in here? Anyway, I got my start in council back in 2003, and it took me a few years to understand that a job means something to individual people. Yeah, it means something. And so once you get a good job, that translates into a good, solid family. And once you start building good, solid families, you start building good communities. But I wanted it in a large scale where I could affect not only my village, but I could affect the region. And so our council, High Nation Council, started supporting forestry, mining, and LNG. Chevron left town, a $30 billion project. They left town in 2017. It was heartbreaking. But LNG Canada, the largest private investment in Canadian history, $40 billion, transformed the region and transformed BC. That one project alone will bring $23 billion in revenue to BC. One project. One tanker leaving every second day carries $100 million worth of natural gas, which should come from the Peace region, made in BC. It should, but it's not, because there's no permits being issued for natural gas to get that gas out of the ground, into the pipeline, and into the terminal in Kitimat. There's no forestry permits. We're watching forestry mills shut down all across BC, including Terrace. We just heard an announcement yesterday up in the Lakes District, another forestry mill. Close to 30 curtailments and shutdowns all across BC, and nothing's being done. In fact, one of the comments I heard the minister make a couple years ago was saying, well, it's not that bad because we have a shortage of healthcare workers. Are you kidding me? This guy's been falling trees for 30 years and now you want it to be a doctor? We have generational workers in the forest industry. And so over the years, I've actually never changed my tune about what I stand for. I do stand for people getting a good job. I do stand for strong communities. And so I was an MLA for the last 6 years in the BC legislature now. And over the years, 7 years, the BC Conservatives, Bob Zimmer, you saw earlier on, he did the housekeeping. I kept in contact with them. They were originally the ones that actually asked me to run for the Conservatives. But the BC election came up first. But I always kept in the back of my mind that the Conservatives were actually going to welcome me. So this past year, last couple of years, I've been watching Pierre Poilievre. I've been watching him on C-SCAN. I've been watching the debates, and I was very impressed with him. I liked his straightforward conversation and questions and answers. I like that. And because that's what I view myself as being just a straightforward person. And so as I watched him, I truly believe that this is a man that stands by his principles, and he truly loves Canada. And he's got a background that's not quite typical of politicians. And so when they asked me again to run, I thought, okay, I've done as much as I could for my community. I've done as much as I can for my region. I've done as much as I can for province. Maybe it's time for me to step up and put my name in the ring, but I do want to hear more from Pierre Poilievre.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thanks for staying with us. In Canada, the leader of the opposition is the leader of the largest political party sitting in opposition to the federal government. In other words, it is a party with the second largest number of seats in the House of Commons. Let us return the conversation with federal leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre.
I can't think of a better representative for the people of this community. Someone whose ancestry literally goes back tens of thousands of years, it's since time immemorial. Someone who grew up living off the land, whose father was a fisherman, who's hunted in these lands since he was a little boy, who's represented his community, who was given the great honor of being the Grand Chief of the Haisla First Nation, who was one of the key architects that fought for and delivered the single biggest building project in the history of Canada, the $40 billion LNG Canada project. Someone who has defended his constituents as a member of the Legislative Assembly, always remembering that he did not work for the politicians in Victoria, but for the people on the ground in northern British Columbia. This is the kind of common sense voice that I need at the highest levels of my government in order to make common sense common again in Canada. How does that sound? You know, he was knocking on doors, and he never stops knocking on doors. Wouldn't that be a true statement, Gina? This is his boss, Gina. Stand up, Gina. She works in his constituency office. She's the one that helps you get that birth certificate. She's also the director of First Impressions in Ellis's office. It's one of the reasons why he's so popular. And he never stops knocking on doors. One day, he wouldn't stop even though the sun had long gone out. And it was getting darker and darker, and his volunteers said, Ellis, you're going to start waking people up and losing votes here if you don't knock it off. And he said, no, just a few more. And he kept going. 9:30 came, 9:45, he wouldn't stop. Finally gets to this house, lights are all off. He says, okay, this will be the last one. Knocks on the door, babies start crying. A few seconds later, the door opened, and a very angry mother said, you just woke up my triplets. And not only that, my husband, who is a championship weightlifter, is going to be down in a moment to have a word with you. And Ellis said, that won't be necessary. Just tell him that the local NDP candidate came by to say hello. So did you hear the news? Justin Trudeau was found to have broken the law yet again. You saw that? The third time. Remember, he was caught breaking the law by accepting a $250,000 vacation from a billionaire who had sought a grant from his government. Then he was found guilty of breaking the law to help SNC-Lavalin, a Liberal-linked multinational corporation, get off charges after they had stolen $100 million from Africa's poorest people. And now he's been found by the federal court to have broken the law in order to oppress our citizens and rob us of our civil rights. Canada's most senior law maker cannot be a law breaker, my friends. But all the damage Trudeau has done would have been impossible without the help of your local NDP Member of Parliament. You elected him to represent you on Parliament Hill. And what did he do then? He turned his back on you, and he joined with Trudeau to vote to quadruple the carbon tax, to ban your hunting rifle, to allow repeat violent criminals to run loose on our streets, to decriminalize crack and heroin and cause a massive drug crisis. And yes, he voted with Trudeau to impose martial law and take away people's civil rights. That is the record. That is a member of Parliament who does not work for you. He works for Justin Trudeau, and soon he won't have a job at all. And what are the consequences of these policies? After 8 years of Trudeau and the NDP, housing costs have doubled. Food costs so much, 2 million people are going every single month to a food bank. After 8 years of Trudeau and the NDP, violent crime is up 40%, gun crimes up over 100%. Canada's GDP per capita has now fallen for 6 consecutive quarters. It has had the worst GDP growth of any of the G7 countries, and according to the OECD, is expected to be the worst of all 40 OECD countries over the next 30 years after 8 years of Trudeau and the NDP. We have carpenters who cannot afford the homes they build and are forced to live in parking lots. After 8 years of Trudeau and the NDP, we have homeless encampments in places that we never imagined we'd see them before. One in Kelowna, right along a beautiful path that was supposed to be for people to run and bike, and now it's completely closed off. In Halifax, they have 30 homeless encampments in one city. 30. Toronto is now the worst housing bubble in the world. Vancouver, the third most overpriced housing market on planet Earth, and you can buy a castle with 20 rooms in Scotland for a lower price than a 2-bedroom condo in Kitchener, Ontario. That is life after 8 years of Justin Trudeau and the NDP. And more people are giving up hope, falling into a life of drugs. 30,000 Canadians have lost their lives to drug overdoses. And in a few months, the government will start giving people lethal injections if they're depressed and given up on life, as medical assistance in dying will be expanded to people whose only condition is mental illness. And that includes things like addiction. Could you have imagined that our country would be in this state only 8 years ago?
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Common sense typically refers to practical, everyday wisdom that is widely accepted as true or valid. It often involves making sound judgments and decisions based on experience, reason, and good judgment rather than on specialized knowledge or expertise. Let us return the conversation as Pierre shares his common sense beliefs.
Good old-fashioned common sense. And here's the plan. 1, we're going to lower prices by axing the carbon tax to bring down gas, heat, and grocery bills. This is a carbon tax brought in by a combination of the NDP provincial government and the federal government. Both of them have mandated it for the tax to rise up to 61 cents a liter. The only way to stop it is by voting Conservative. We are the only party that is against the tax, and we will fight this tax in order to eliminate this extra burden on our people and allow Canadians, particularly rural Canadians, to afford a decent quality of life. This is a tax on your food. I have a tomato farm in my riding. They're taxed on the CO2 they release into their greenhouse, even though that CO2 is absorbed by the plant life. And it doesn't go into the atmosphere. Apparently, Trudeau missed that day in science class. So what happens now is it's more affordable to buy a Mexican tomato in Manotick than a Manotick tomato in Manotick. So the price signal is for people to buy the more polluting tomato that had to be transported by truck and train, burning fossil fuels right across North America, rather than buying the more environmentally responsible local grown produce. Conservatives believe in bringing home farm production, and so we will lift this tax off our farmers and off of all Canadians so that we can produce more of our own food and be self-sufficient once again. We're going to bring home lower prices by ending the inflationary deficits. Money printing always and everywhere leads to higher prices. This is the case over thousands of years. Kings, queens, emperors, presidents, prime ministers who've spent beyond their means always like to take the easy ride of creating more cash. But of course, there's no such thing as magic in the real world. The cost doesn't disappear. It just gets passed on to everybody else. If you have more dollars chasing fewer goods, it always leads to higher prices. So it's very simple. So for example, if you have 10 apples, how do you like them apples? You have 10 apples and $10 in your economy. It's $1 an apple. Now, if all of a sudden you double the money supply to $20, but you still only have 10 apples. It's now $2 for every apple. You don't get richer by creating more cash. You get richer by creating more of what cash buys. In other words, grow more apples rather than produce more cash. But the reason why the government is creating all this cash is because they're spending irresponsibly. My common sense plan would bring in a firm law that would require the government find $1 of savings for each new dollar of spending brought in. This would impose the scarcity within the government rather than by the government. So every creature in the universe, the fish in the seas, the birds in the trees, have to live with scarcity, maximize use of scarce resources. Every creature except the politician, who passes on that scarcity to other people through higher taxes, debt, or inflation. But by passing this law, it will force the same common sense trade-offs that single moms and small businesses make every day. Either we get this or that. We can't have this and that unless we get a bargain on both. So if you're trying to build a patio, and you might have to skip your summer vacation, or you might get a bargain on your vacation and go to the local lumber yard and get some used or disposed of wood in order to build for a lower price so that you do both the vacation and the patio for the confined budget. In government, they have no such confines. They simply add one cost on top of another cost and send you the bill. By internalizing scarcity, we'll force those common sense trade-offs, will require bureaucrats to find the most affordable way to deliver the highest value to the Canadian people. We know that if politicians do not have legal limits on their spending, they will not control themselves. We will bring in a common sense, dollar for dollar law to make sure your money is protected. We will. We're going to get rid of the $35 billion infrastructure bank that has failed to complete a single solitary project and only exists to ensure the profits of large multinational construction companies.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Recently, GC Strategies, a two-man operation, went on the defense when word linked they were paid $2.5 million for 10 hours of work to develop the ArriveCam app. In this final segment of Open Connection, Pierre shares some of his strategies to save the government money.
We'll get rid of the $54 million ArriveCam app to save money on this terrible app we didn't need that violated your rights, and that could have been done in a weekend by a couple of IT workers. In fact, it was. A couple of guys got a case of beer and a couple of pizzas, and they did rebuild the ArriveCam app in one weekend just to demonstrate that it never should have cost $54 million. I'm going to ask these guys if I can get this app from them and send it to Trudeau. We'll call it the ResignCam app. We're going to save $1 billion by getting rid of the Green Fund that they've created, that $150 million with it, which has already been misappropriated. We're going to cut back on the $21 billion they're now spending on consultants. That's a 100% increase in the last 8 years, and it works out to $1,400 for every family in Canada for federal consultants alone, even though the bureaucracy has grown by 50% in the last decade. I'm going to require the bureaucrats do the work in-house for a low price rather than farming it out to $5,000 a day shady consultants. That's one way we can save money. And we're going to stop sending so much of our money out of the country in foreign aid to dictators and terrorists and multinational bureaucracies. Bring it home! Bring it home! Those are common sense ways that we can save cash, but we need to get the Bank of Canada back to its core mandate. Under Justin Trudeau, the bank started printing money to fund his spending addiction. They turned themselves into his personal ATM machine. I will bring in a new governor of the bank who understands that he has one job. That is to protect the purchasing power of your money by keeping inflation low. And I will ban the Bank of Canada from bringing in a central bank digital currency. Well, before I go on, I forgot. I'm going to get myself in trouble. My wife designed this T-shirt. I want to show it to you. What do you think? You like the shirt? Axe the tax. You can go to bringithome.ca to get one of these things. What we need to do, instead of creating more cash, is create more of what cash buys. In other words, grow more apples or build more homes, produce more energy, generate more output, rather than just creating the cash that buys that output. Now, how are we going to do that? It starts by ending the war on work. Canada punishes work right now. We have high levels of taxation and clawbacks every time you go out and earn $1. If a single mom earning $60,000 with 3 kids earns another $1, she can lose as much as 80 cents in clawbacks of her child benefit, income tax, payroll tax, and then, of course, gas and carbon tax to get to work. That means of her $25 an hour wage, she loses $20 and she takes home $5. No one should be expected to work for $5 an hour, but with government penalties, that's the way it works. Common sense conservatives will lower income tax so you bring home more of each dollar you earn, and hard work once again pays off. We're going to get out of the way of job creation by allowing more of our own resource production in this country. Absolutely. So let's start with natural gas. We have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas right beneath our feet in this country. Now, the biggest ever project of any kind in any industry is right here in this riding, but in Kitimat, because Ellis Ross and others like him had a vision that we could export our gas to the world. That's a massive opportunity. It's paychecks. But we could have done so much more. When Trudeau took office, there were 18 proposed natural gas liquefaction projects. Not a single one of them is yet complete. When the German Chancellor and the Japanese Prime Minister came to Canada asking for our gas to break their dependence on Putin, he said there's no business case. Even though the Americans have built 7 in the last 8 years, the Qataris have doubled their production and signed a 3.5 million cubic meter deal with the French to supply Europe. The Germans have built a natural gas import terminal from concept to completion in 194 days, half a year. In 8 years, we haven't been able to complete a single solitary project, and there's only one that's under construction, and it's the one that Ellis worked on. My common sense plan is to by the way, we have an enormous opportunity in this area. We're way more advantaged than the Americans. I'll be giving the examples of why. 1, we have the shortest shipping distances to both Asia and Europe from North America. 2, we have clean, emissions-free hydroelectricity in BC, Quebec, and Newfoundland that could power the liquefaction facilities without any pollution whatsoever. And 3, what does it take to liquefy a gas? Coal. What do we have in Canada?
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.